Welcome back. We're here to recap the third 6 weeks, just the final portion of the third 6 weeks. In case you can't recognize me, it's Mr. Byrd yet again. We'll begin with the vocabulary and just quickly touch on each lesson that was covered, just to kind of get your memory running. First thing, your vocabulary. You saw terms such as algebraic expressions, evaluate, defining the variable, property, commutative property, associative property, identity property, and inverse property. You'll notice that the emphasis this 6 weeks was on all the different properties, so you might want to go back and recap more specifics on each one in case this video doesn't quite, do it for you. Other words that you saw were the distributive property, factoring the expression, term, coefficient, constant, like terms, equation, equal sign, solve, and solution. Again, this is just meant to kind of get your memory flowing, get those thoughts coming back to you for all the lessons that we covered. For more in-depth explanations, see me during class or after school. First thing, algebraic expressions. What you have to understand is that an algebraic expression is different from a numerical expression because you actually have a letter, a variable in there. So if you see one of those in that equation or in that expression, you've got an algebraic expression. And here are a few examples of them, such as multiplication, addition, and so on. As far as writing an algebraic expression, first thing, the most important thing is defining the variable. Don't just assign a random letter. Try to stick to what they're talking about. If they're talking about time, call it T. Age, call it A. Distance, D. If you're not sure, the safest ones are usually X and Y. Otherwise, try to stick to whatever it is they're talking about. Be as thorough as possible. With the properties, the main thing you have to know here is that each one has its own specific details. So let's go a bit more into them. So first one would be the commutative property. What you'll notice there is that on one side of the equation, you have one thing, for example here, 7 plus 9. On the other side, you would have 9 plus 7. You're pretty much switching it around, but it still gives you the same answer. With the associative property, what you're doing is you're relocating your parentheses, but still getting the same solution. With the identity property, what happens there is pretty much anything added to, or if you add 0 to anything, you get the same number that you began with, like 13 plus 0, 13. The inverse property pretty much states that if you add or multiply the opposite, you end up getting 0 or 1, depending on what you're doing. That's a quick emphasis on the properties. Now, one more property would be the distributive property. And in that one, what's happening is you're combining terms. For example, in that second one, the one that says algebra, you're getting A and you're multiplying it by everything that's inside that parentheses. So you would have A times B plus 8 times C. You combined A with B and A with C. You're distributing, you're giving out that number or that variable. That's the main thing that you should think about when you're looking at these properties. As far as simplifying an expression, that can be kind of tricky. Just understand this for a quick explanation. If you have x's in your equation, in your expression, combine them. Combine your x's. Like here you have 3x and x. That becomes 4x. If you have several constants, combine those with each other. So x's with x's, constants with constants, y's with y's, and so on and so forth. That's kind of a quick and easy way to remember that. And here are some examples. For instance, in the first one, what are all the different ones that are in common? They all have x's. So you can actually put all three of them together. You have 1x, and then 4x, and then 6x. It's pretty much like saying 1 plus 4 plus 6, which is 11x. Look at the other one. 3x plus 4x plus 5x. If you look at it carefully, it gives you 12x. You combined them. Now we've got some multiplication, and that's something that's going to take a little bit more emphasis right there, a little bit more of a different approach. So let's talk about that one next. Now in this one, what you would do is you would multiply that negative 9 with that 5. And that x pretty much just comes along for the ride, that variable. So you would do 9 times 5, which is 45. And of course, don't forget the rule. A negative times a positive is a negative. So you would end up with negative 45x. Look at the next one. What can you combine there? You can combine your x's, which gives you 16x. And your y, you can't really do much to it, so you would just put it together. Plus 8y. Now in this next example, number 5, you can distribute. So we're going back to those properties we talked about. 7 times 3x, which is 21x, and 7 times 5y, which is 35y. And in the last one, you can combine all of your variables. So you'd end up with 11x. Moving on to equations. The main thing is, and if you look at these very carefully, the difference between an equation and an expression is that an equation, it's a mathematical sentence that shows how two expressions are equal. You have that equal sign right there. An expression is more of a combination of numbers and operations, and it might contain variables, but notice there's no equal sign. So in that one, it's not always going to have some sort of solution, but in an equation, you should be able to solve it in some way or another. So pay very close attention to that when you hear the difference between expression and equation. Speaking of equations, when you want to solve one, what you would do is your goal is to replace that variable with some sort of solution, with some sort of number, rather. That pretty much means you're solving the equation. When you find what that variable should equal to, you have found a solution. So here the solution is 7. X equals to 7. And by doing that, you've made this equation true. Now, as far as writing equations and representing solutions, mainly you should focus on the wording. They'll usually give you subtle hints that give away what your variable is probably going to be. And words such as equal, well, that means you're going to put an equal sign. Or whenever they say this is, that's usually another way of saying equals. So go ahead and read this one, let it kind of soak in, and notice how they gave you what oranges were, and they want to know what juice is. And when they say they are 210 calories, that means that's what it equals to. It can be very tricky. Just read them carefully. That's the most important thing here. Always be very careful. Here's another one. They're talking about Irwin Park and Lake Arrowhead Park. In this one, they told you what Lake Arrowhead Park has, right? It has 3 less hiking trails. That means subtract 3. And of course, read it carefully. You'll notice that they're giving away what it equals to, which is 5, because that's what Lake Arrowhead Park equals to in the end. So coming soon with the 4th 6 weeks recap, the first part will be equations, inequalities, and we're going to go real deep into those. The second half of the 4th 6 weeks, we'll talk about angles, area, and we're going to touch on volume briefly. Be prepared because that 6 weeks is going to breeze by, and before you know it, we'll be talking about the 5th 6 weeks. I'll see you soon.